Story with Cats, her latest nonfiction book, one of the great love stories of our time. Lorna Crozier lives on Vancouver Island. Lorna, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. And it's great to be at this event. Ronsdale Press has done such good work for poets across the country, and we're so glad to hear that with the tragic death of Ron, the press is continuing. I'm hearing an echo. I don't know if someone has not muted or if this can be fixed. Am I still echoing? Okay, that might have taken care of it. I live on the stolen land between the traditional villages of the Chatham and Powquitchin people, and Kelsey lives near the Sayout village, and we'd like to acknowledge that, please. Kelsey and I met many years ago. We can't quite remember the year because we both seem to lose track of numbers. When I was teaching a poetry session at the United Church Educational Center in Naramata in the Okanagan. I didn't know why they had asked me. I was a little scared because this was a United Church Education Center, and I thought, oh my God, everyone's going to be a religious nut. But it turned out that they weren't. Even the ministers who came and wanted to learn more about poetry were very open, non-conventional people. But I remember Kelsey so vividly because she was merely a kid at the time, and I didn't know anything about her except every time I asked her to write something with the rest of the group, we were all stunned into silence when Kelsey read her response because it was so stunning. And I knew that I was going to see this young woman in print down the road. And here it is, this first wonderful book. It's so exciting for me when someone not only fulfills the promise that you saw in them when they were young, but when they exceed it, when they leap into a realm of writing truly magnificent poems that are going to make a difference to each of us who read them, and I think to the world at large. Kelsey didn't want me to give much of a biography. She'd like her poetry, I think, to speak for itself. But she grew up essentially in northern Alberta and has been a West Coast resident for the past few years. The way that we thought we would set this up is that I'm going to ask her around 3 questions, and then she'll give a reading of approximately 10 minutes or so. Then I'll ask 3 more, she'll read a few more poems, and then we'll open the event up to questions you might have for her. So Kelsey, I wonder if you could start us off by discussing the genesis of this book, where it started for you, how many years of poetry it represents.
Sure. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Can you hear me? Am I okay? Oh, good. Okay. This book is at least 20 years old. It started before I even had any idea that there would be a book. Just poems that happened because they had to happen, I think. And then I was dealing with depression, and I had moved, and so some of the poems are about missing my home, some of them are about depression, some of them are about nothing in particular, and then I sort of got better, mostly at some point, and sort of woke up to myself and realized I had a book's worth of poems, and that's how it came about.
I really like the expression, the poems happened because they had to happen, and that you woke up to yourself. Those are such great ways to describe this crazy and wonderful art form that we're all involved in. I remember holding my first book in my hand. I won't even tell you how long ago it was, but there are many people who are here who are younger than when that happened. But what did it feel like when you got that book in the mail and you had it in your hands for the first time?
Oh, it was amazing. It was in a little box, and you open the box and they're there and they've got your name on them, and just they seem different because they're in print, and they seem somehow more real. It was really special.
They look like the real thing, don't they? When they're
Yeah.
in that nice typescript and they each have their own page and their own page number, table of contents. My God, I actually did it. I wrote a book.
Exactly.
When we were talking about the book, you said that the process of pulling it together and working with an editor on a collection rather than an individual poem felt like a very different thing. And I wonder if you could talk about that, what that difference was, and maybe what it taught you about the process of writing and what you'll be doing with your next book.
Sure. One of the things I realized was I had little obsessions. Like I had maybe 14 instances of hands. I don't know why I'm fascinated by hands, but I am. And hair and mouths, who knows? And then it was interesting looking at the whole thing because there were some old ones, some new ones, and seeing how things had changed. And then the editor, Liz Phillips, who's amazing, she helped me to put them in an order that made some kind of sense so that I saw almost a narrative in the poems as well as in each poem. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I think everyone's anxious to hear some of this work that I have been praising. So I'll turn it over to you and let's hear from Big Sky Falling.
Okay, thank you. So I will start with, what is a lake? A lake is a mouthful of sky taken by a giant, then spat out on the ground. It is a pasture for grazing canoes, a beaver's life's work, the forest's cold womb, a child's misshapen clay bead on a snarled string of stream. It is the precipice that is a loon's call, that long fall into wildness. And then I'm going to try and read a prose poem. I find them a little bit harder than ones in stanzas, but here we go. Light touches. The sun coming through the window is washed by last night's storm. Light must be washed to be at its best, and rain washes it, even when it rains at night. This light is clean and hung to dry in the wind. The sun touches each of the leaves of the chestnut out the window individually, because it always has time for everyone, whether it be to bless or to burn. The sun casts its negative on the grass, making a tree out of shade, flat as though it too has been hung to dry. It is called shade, as though there is no light there, but that is not true. Even the deepest shade is blessed by the light. One must wait until night to be blessed by the dark. My mother sits in the shade of the porch and calls her sister. The light of the shade touches her, even in the secret places under her arms, between her legs. This morning I slept in and she put butter and honey on my toast for me. Honey is light decanted and made sweet and slow, the only light you can eat. It is dark as night inside you, and honey is the only light that reaches into those occluded spaces. But perhaps there is a pink glow all along the inside of the skin, the same as when you're a child in the outhouse and cup your hands over the flashlight. The fingers glow more on the edges, are dusky over bones, a pink that shocks because of the small blood vessels, as your mother tells you, slightly apologetically, when you ask her, "This is why pigs are pink." It is the first time you think of your flesh as meat, and you are not sure you like it. But maybe that dusky pink glow lies under your skin all day, light persisting as it does. This one is After Happiness by Stephen Dunn. Sorrows. A stone in your pocket, then another and another. You can take them out, clicking together and stained with earth. You cannot drop them in the ditch, though they erode as you handle them, become smaller, smooth. By the end, your pockets will bulge. Each is beautiful with striation or quartz. Each has a name. You speak as a friend's. And then this one, similar to Sorrows, is about depression. So it's obvious by the name. Doctors call it depression, but that is not his name. He is waking up again. I hear his fretful mutterings as he begins to stir. If I knew the right lullaby, perhaps I could sing him back to sleep, but he doesn't seem to know the songs I know, and he comes out to play. He sprints from palm to fingertip, and my hands ache with numbness. They lie in my lap like stunned fish and will not take up a pen. Somehow he talks little Hope from next door into playing hide and seek. She hides so well that I can never find her. Food is ash in my mouth, gravel in my gut. Suddenly my breast is empty and my arms will not rise. What do I call this pain? Perhaps if I knew the full name, I could call him home as mothers do at dinner time. Perhaps he would eat and be satisfied. Then I could lead him, holding his hand as he took the giant steps from rib to rib, up to the little bed built especially for him in my heart. And this one's a little bit about after the Depression. It has a epigraph, is the word, from Dorian Lau. Everything ends, even pain, even sorrow. Green. There is guilt in going on, in drifting swan serene from the site of an explosion. It is not our fault, even if the ex is still sad, or the brother still dead, or the child still broken. We drift past, hurting terribly, and then not, for whole days at a time. Then, unlooking, we uncover joy somehow, like light hidden green under a cabbage we pick for coleslaw. We must forgive ourselves our appetites. We must allow ourselves our lives unfolding. And then if I can figure out which is next here. I wanted to do this one because there's a little show and tell. This is the ugly fish mug. And you will see it's got two cute fish here. And then on the other side is a slightly less cute fish. So this poem is called The Ugly Fish Mug. It's after Bone China by Patrick Lane. The Ugly Fish Mug. My wrist is thick as the handle of the ugly fish mug that is my favorite for morning tea. It is big, dark blue with an ugly fish, though I call him ugly cute when my sister is here because she gave it to my father. Two of the fish are perfectly average. It is known for the third, the one whose tail is a flail and whose body is the wrong shape. That fish knows more than he says. And like I said, I grew up in Northern Alberta, moved to Vancouver, and it took me a while to learn to love Vancouver as much as I'd love Northern Alberta. So this is a homesick poem. Red Wing. She has forgotten the sound of the blackbird's cry. She still has the look of him when he sits at the crown of a naked aspen like oil paint, the red so red that it's a name on a tiny tube next to scarlet and carnelian in the artist's supply shop, with a tiny bit of blue, perhaps from shadowed snow in the underlayer to make it shine. She still owns the feel of half-frozen mud, hard and brittle and sticky and slick under the balls of her feet, the smell of a lake soon to be frozen to the bottom. But she has lost the sound of the blackbird's cry. There are degrees of loneliness. And then this one is after I learned to love the coast as well. It's a moon poem. I have several moon poems. Moon howl. Mess of light behind clouds, spill of luminescence meandering in the morning, move into my mouth, myrrh and musk and maudlin and nest there, your monthly making of yourself, your monthly making yourself less. My mollusk tongue warms to your cool fire. And then I'll do just one more. This is also a coast poem because the snails are not as good in Northern Alberta as they are here. So it also has an epigraph that goes, how many teeth does the snail have? Tens of thousands upon the tongue, by Miriam Yvette Parhiskar, from Study Guide Toward Naturalization of the Mouth. And it's called Snail. Snails are tongues pried loose from mouths and clothed in enamel. They mumble to the earth, leaving a trail of glistening words that cannot be enunciated. If we could hear them, what words would tongues loosened until truly free have to give? Quiet, they repeat, and green, green, green. Snails dream of mulch and moonlight. They say gentle to the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You read your poems so beautifully too. And I remember that being something that you were born with, I believe, because from the first time I met you, you were able to present your poems with that kind of passion and articulation. By the way, I noticed that Tim Scorer is part of this panel, and Tim is the one who brought us together. Tim was the program director, I may have the title wrong, at Naramata, and was the one who invited me, and the place where Kelsey showed up. And I remember those days by the lake outside of Penticton that were just gorgeous because of the setting, but because of the poets who came and the kinds of discussions we had under Tim's wing, under Tim's poetic wing. So special welcome to you, Tim. There are several poems in the book about childhood, and some of them are a little darker than others. I'm thinking specifically of the one on the school bus, where the speaker of the poem notices this little boy pulling wings off flies. And the poem ends with a surprise, really quite wonderfully. But I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how these memories have surfaced and have become the inspiration for poems, because you show us the richness of childhood, but also the toughness of it sometimes, and how it can be a very difficult country to live through and to walk through.
I think those poems were some of the ones that had to be written. And I needed some way to make them something outside of myself. And it's really interesting for me, when I wrote the poems, I then had some external thing and could look at it as a piece of art and change a word here and there. And then when I was done changing them, somehow it felt like I'd done some kind of work on the inside, on the actual memories. And so it was a little bit easier to carry them. I'm not sure how that works. It's mysterious.
Yeah. Again, a lovely summation of what poetry can sometimes do for the writer. Totally unexpected, right? We're driven to write something, but it maybe do a small bit of healing for us. I never think they heal us completely, but perhaps they at least put a light coating on whatever wound it is that might have inspired a poem. One of the things I love about your work, and it's evident throughout this book, is your connection with the natural world. And whether it's the prairies, and the poems about the prairies make me homesick. The one about the red-winged blackbird makes me want to fly to Saskatchewan right now, even though it's probably going through a brutal winter. But your connection with the natural world, and you see creatures as they are, but then you also see something else, as if you've got a sort of third eye that sees what most of us haven't noticed before. An example is the poem that you just read about the snail. The snail says gentle to the ground. Of course it does, but I never thought of that before. I didn't know that until you told me in the poem. So when did you know that the environment, that animals, that plants were going to be a source of such deep inspiration for you, and they were going to be a passion that illuminates your words?
I'm not sure I knew until the poems were written. I think that was one of the things that I discovered when I had all those poems in a pile was, wow, there's lots of animal poems, and there's lots of little animal poems. Yeah, I think it was something that told me as opposed to my telling it, if that makes sense.
So do you walk around outside with a a camera, a magnifying glass, a notebook, and take note of these little creatures, as you say, around you? Or is it something that enters you, but you don't even know it until you start to look for language on the page?
I might not know it until I start to look for language. Yeah.
Great. The magic of poetry again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to mention what is a lake? And when you said a lake is a beaver's life work, how great is that? Of course it is, hooray to the beaver. And I've just got one more question before we hear you again, and then the audience will have a chance after your second set to pose some questions for you. And we've already had a comment in chat. I noticed somebody thanking you for writing poems about depression. There are several in the book, and I'm glad that you read a couple. Were they more difficult to write? Were they hard to write? And I wonder if you see them as talking to a different audience than some of the other poems in the book are speaking to.
They were hard to write, yes. And I think originally they were written for me. There's sort of two voices in the book. There's the, oh, I'm depressed and this is terrible, it hurts voice. And then there's another voice that comes in that sort of, yeah, but it's going to be okay. And they're both me, and there's this tension between them. After writing them, I hope that other people with depression will read them and feel seen in some way. But originally they were written for me.
And is it possible to write when you're going through depression, or do you have to wait to get out of it and see some kind of light? A line I was thinking of, again, that hasn't to do with depression, but this wonderful thing you said, which could have been written by Leonard Cohen: even the deepest shade is blessed by the light. And I so felt that when I was reading these particular poems. But I'm wondering, when you're in that state, is it mostly a silent state?
Yes, that state is silent. I wrote a lot of poems just coming down into depression. So just when I was looking and I knew it was going to get bad and I was scared right there, and then coming out. So those are the two voices, I think.
Well, thank you again, in particular, for having the courage to go to that place where many of us have been, some in smaller ways perhaps, and some in larger. And it's always a thrill to recognize yourself and who you are in someone else's work and be acknowledged. And you did that. So could you read some more for us, please, Kelsey?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I wanted to start with the Grand Prairie poem. This one makes me homesick too. Land rich, pinch of dirt sits prim on the center of my tongue, crumbly prickly when it's dry, spit turns it soft and sweet. This field I'm in smells of dust and combines. You can hold hand in your hand, rivers of palmist blackness, lifeline flecked with dry manure, big sky falling into darkness, and mosquitoes which taste of blood. And this one's sort of for my grandparents. It has an epigraph that goes, my dead lovers are hungry in the kitchen, so I fix them food they cannot eat, by Natalie Centers Zapico from Paper Cuts. It's called Empire Cookies. My grandparents eat Empire cookies and Datovers from the Sydney bakery, microwave apple crumble Grandpa makes with vanilla ice cream. Grandma leans in the doorway with a can of chocolate and Sure, lazy as she would have held a beer a few years ago. I could be in a commercial, she says, holding it up in an invincible toast. I've gained 4 pounds. The gluten-free cookbooks from the celiac years live on in the bookshelf, and we make the same stewed rhubarb in the glass 8-cup measure. We still shop at Sydney Bakery, though now they're closed on Mondays. And this one is for a lake. We spend 2 weeks every summer at a lake near 100 Mile House. And it's very special for all of us. So, girl tea. That day I floated between layers of water delineated by temperature, warm on top, then medium, then the dark cold that belongs to fish. I floated like a tea bag, made a tisane of me. I warmed the water and mixed the layers and saw light arrow through green and golden at once. The water lapped at me like smooth tongues, like the earth was licking me clean, and I was clean. And I leaked out into the water, and the water leaked into me. That lake is home. I think there still. And this one is about a farmer, but I feel it's important first to say that it's not a farmer that I know. This is an imaginary farmer. It's After the Forgotten Dialect of the Heart by Jack Gilbert. City girl marries the wrong farmer and laments. Sadness is seduction by moths, butterfly kisses that leave tiny wing prints of ash in the sweat of my palms. Loneliness is ambergris and gasoline on my skin. Anger has the weight of all the soil in our fields and the lime you sowed and the irrigation pipes we laid in silence like flagellation. This is what my body wants to say to your body. Vacancy. There is space in me where you are not. Bud. A broken bone is an open wound, and a lucky rabbit's foot is the severed limb of a creature. This bud I hold between my fingers, furry on the outside, is broken open. I cannot see a seed, so I think it is a leaf bud, plucked chartreuse wound. There is beauty in dismemberment. It smells of small branches, and the fur sits against my nose. I will keep it in a pocket, and the fur will rub off on coins and catch in a Kleenex. And this one is a love poem because we all have them. If I was a tree, would you love me? If I had green leaves that opened to you as if to sunlight? If I had branches that were rough on the outside, but inside I was pale, creamy green, smooth and wet. If I had sap, the color of amber that flowed so slowly and formed round jewels where you cut me, would you love me then? Not a happy love poem, to be fair, but. This one is written in Burnaby. I went to the library and the little park behind the library, and then I went home and did a writing exercise that said, write about your day. So sometimes writing exercises turn into poems. Track behind the library in the park. The cenotaph says, they died so that we may live. In front of it, someone has gathered the wreaths from Remembrance Day into 2 black garbage bags. The ones that don't fit are stacked like green tires. A Maltese pees on a rock, and a bunch of people walk by looking at their phones. A sad woman jogs past. She will go 3 times around the track, past the man sitting on the bench and the children playing with soccer balls. She will face, then turn from the mountains in the distance once, twice, then a 3rd time, eyes on her fancy shoes. And this one, I was on the board of directors of a housing program for the mentally ill. I was one of the patient people on the board, if that makes sense. And it wasn't a really good experience. It was the most stigma I've experienced in probably my life. So I wrote this to remind myself. Diagnosis. Silence is a sickness. If not allowed free movement, a tongue will atrophy, then swell. Appendicitis of the mouth, old doctors call it. What should have been said stagnates in the lungs, bubbles like pneumonia, can be spelled as bitterness on breath. Silence is a sickness. Speak. And this is one of those childhood poems. two kinds of kites. When I was 13 months old, my parents flew me like a kite. I learned to run before I could walk, Dad says, and did both before I learned how not to fall. They held me up with a harness and leash. I learned to soar downwards, to trust in the string. Mom remembers some old ladies with thin mouths, just like a dog, they said. But because of the string, my face didn't hit the ground and I still have a nose, Dad says. So there's that. I do not remember being a kite, but I remember our Alberta winds were too strong for them. As soon as I got one up and gave it some height, the string would cut my young flesh to the blood and then snap, and the kite would fly high into the sky and disappear. And then I thought I'd end with a sky poem, because one of the things I missed the most when I moved was the sky. We have lovely skies here, but they're not quite the same. So this one has an epigraph too. None of them knew the color of the sky, by Stephen Crane from The Open Boat. It's called The Farthest Thing. It's not so much blue as a collection of layers of semi-gloss paint like onion skin, each layer a slightly different definition of the word blue. As I stand in the driveway, the sky is a bowl brought down over my eyes like the grown-out bowl cut my sister used to have. There is a bite to it with crooked teeth that leaves a funny wriggly mark on my skull, because things that hurt this much are also beautiful, and vice versa. As I walk from the house to the dugout, the sky smells of crows under feathers, of jet fuel, of car exhaust, and velvet night, and scintillating morning. The sky reaches down to flatten me against the brittle plastic chair in the backyard, the wheat field beyond held down by blue. It makes me want to live under it always, though I die of exposure, a voice for each animal layer of blue singing in my ears of glory until the night comes and the breathy voices whisper of things that are too big for me. It wraps around my wrists like bangles, like bandages for cuts I don't know I have yet. Too much beauty is dangerous. Too much sky, too close, too far around could drive me mad.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I've been thinking of what Stanley Kunitz, the American poet who wrote well into his late 90s, said about writing poetry. He said it's the most solitary, the most difficult, and the most life-enhancing act that one can engage in. And I felt that my life was enhanced through hearing you read. I'm so glad that the poems happened because they had to happen. And just before we turn the rest of the program over to your questions, and Kevin is going to handle those, I remind everyone that Kelsey's book is called Big Sky Falling. We probably haven't said that enough, but let's keep buying books of poetry to keep the work going, the press is going, and people like Kelsey writing and thriving in her work. And I so look forward to seeing what you're going to come up with next. And I'm so proud of you, if I may say that, having been one of your early teachers. And I notice your mom is here. Maybe she could give a wave. Where's your mom? Okay. And we will turn it over to Kevin and the rest of you to pose this wonderful poet with her first book, the questions that you would like her to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Kelsey. We don't have any questions yet. We just have a ton of praise. There's been a magnificent, powerful, a bunch of stunnings. Your reading is luscious. Love for the line, honey is like decanted, which I honestly love too. A lot of thanks and appreciation for writing so honestly about your experiences with depression. We do have some more time here, so anybody has any questions they'd like to ask, if they just want to throw it along to Kevin in the chat, I'll pass them along to Kelsey. Will there be an audio version of the book? I'll handle that one, because audio versions of the book are not really in the short-term plans for Ronseal Press right now. We do hope there'll be an e-version of the book, but you won't have Kelsey's voice with that. That'd be something, yeah, that'd be something to look at down the line a little, I think. Yeah. Runaway Leona couldn't put the sky falling down until she read every word. Some questions about getting the recording of the Zoom event. We have recorded it. I will take your names down, the ones that were interested, and I will find out how to get a copy of that and pass it along. Nicole Ardiel wants to know how you chose the title of your book.
That was the amazing Liz Phillips, my editor. And it's from a little line from the poem Landrich. And it's just so perfect. It was amazing actually having a title, because I had no title. And then she said, oh, this is the title. And I was like, yes, 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 it is. And it was amazing.
Leanne Fournier would like to know, how do you know when a poem is finished?
That's a tough question. I think there's something when I read it out loud, I can hear it. It's almost, I used to say it's almost like a string of a guitar or something. It kind of moves in the back of your head. I have recently been taking more courses on how to edit poems. And so now I'm not as sure as I used to be when they were finished, because it turns out when you edit them more, they get a little better. So now I don't know when they're finished at all.
Layberry would like to know who and or what other art forms inspire your poetry.
Oh, good question. Definitely other poetry, and novels, lots of writing, and just the natural world is really inspiring too. I think Lorna Crozier is a big influence.
FT Lamb would like to know how you typically start your poems, and would like to know a little bit about the revision process.
Sometimes a poem starts because I know that there's a line in there. So I start with, usually it's the first line for me. Often I write with prompts. I really like prompt writing. And I find that often I'll start with whatever the subject is, and then it'll twist into whatever it is that's on my mind. And so then the question becomes finding where the poem starts. Editing for me is a lot of reading out loud, over and over and over again. And hopefully, sort of like that string thing I was telling you about, I can hear when it's not quite working. That's the hope. And then I try 14 million things to see if I can get it so that it sounds right.
Daniel Keenan would like to know, do you have a sense of
I think you're frozen. I'm going to just see if I can find the question. Just looking here. Oh, here it is. Do you have a sense of why you chose poetry as your way of expression as opposed to short stories or fiction, nonfiction more generally? I was originally writing short stories, very short stories, very young, like grade school. And then we did a poem called A Kite is a Victim by Leonard Cohen in grade, might have been 8, English. And I thought, you can tell the truth in a poem. And then in grade 11, I read The Book of Mercy, also by Leonard Cohen. And I thought, you can turn self-hatred into something beautiful. And if Leonard Cohen can do it, I want to do that too. So that's why I went for poetry.
Susan Alexander would like to know that you have some poems that are after another poem. How important are the writer's poems to your writing?
Well, very important. Sort of like the prompt thing, I find just trying to come up with a poem all by myself quite difficult. But if I have a poem or an idea from someone else, I can kind of backpack onto that and then leapfrog and do something slightly different. And I think other people writing gives me permission to write myself. So if they write something that's a little difficult or a little harder, then I can do it too. Yeah.
Eleanor Andrews would like to know when you first knew or when you first realized you could be a published poet.
Well, I didn't know I could have a book probably until 4 years ago, when I had this manuscript together and I was like, okay, this is a book. But I think I knew I could be a poet fairly early. I actually, in high school, published a few poems and went to this big reading in Edmonton, which is like 5 hours away from Grand Prairie, and read my poem. I was very proud. And then realized that other people had heard me read the poem and then had opinions about me and about my poem because I'd read it, and realized that I really hadn't been ready. So I knew I could do it, but for a long time, I wasn't sure I was brave enough to do it. And so I had to be brave to publish again later on, I think.
Questions coming. Praise keeps coming in though. If anybody else has any other questions, if you could please send them along now. Otherwise, we are getting pretty close to the end of our allotted time anyway, so I think maybe we'll wrap it up now unless Kelsey or Lorna has anything else they'd like to add. Nancy,
just again, I want to thank you, Kelsey, for everyone's saying here, thank you for your bravery. And I will voice that too. I think we're lucky to have you and your voice in our world now, and we can take you home into our kitchens and offices and bedrooms and read your work through our dark and bright hours of the day. So once again, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone. It's so nice to have you all here. Thank you.
Congratulations, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Love you. Love your book.
Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here today. We hope you enjoyed it. I know Kelsey, Lorna, and I really appreciate it. It was wonderful to see so many people here. If anyone would like to find out more information about Kelsey Andrews or Big Sky Falling, they can find out or ordering information if you're so inclined. You can find out more at ronselpress.com, kelseyandrews.ca, and Big Sky Falling should be available at local bookstores throughout British Columbia. And if not, you can ask them to order it for you. We'll get it out to them, okay? Please just keep coming in. Okay, thank you so much.